The thump-thump of bass from a loud speaker vibrated through the very ground Alex stood on, shaking the fine china inside their quiet home. Laughter, shrill and confident, spilled over the hedges, mixing with the clatter of what sounded like 1,000 metal chairs being dragged across fresh grass. Alex's heart hammered against their ribs. It was happening. They had known it would, but the sheer, brazen audacity of it still stole the breath right out of their lungs. Alex burst out of the back door, sunlight suddenly too bright, sound too loud. Their meticulously cared-for backyard, a sanctuary of flowering shrubs and gentle winding paths, was no longer their own. It was a carnival, a circus, a monstrous invasion. A bouncy castle, ludicrously bright and deflated, lay like a dead monster near their prized rose bushes. Catering tables, laden with platters of cheese and fruit, stretched across what used to be a pristine stretch of lawn. Strangers, dozens of them, milled about, drinks in hand, pointing and chattering. And there, in the very center of it all, her hands on her hips, a triumphant smile plastered across her face, stood Brenda Sterling, president of the Maple Creek Homeowners Association. She was wearing a flowy, floral dress and a wide-brimmed hat, looking like a queen surveying her newly conquered territory. When her eyes landed on Alex, her smile widened, morphing into something sickeningly sweet. "Oh, Alex. Perfect timing," Brenda chirped, her voice cutting through the din, entirely devoid of any genuine warmth. She gestured grandly at the unfolding chaos around them. "The caterers just arrived. Isn't this just divine? We decided your spacious yard would be perfect for the annual HOA Summer Gala. So much more charming than the dusty old clubhouse, wouldn't you agree?" Alex stood frozen, a statue of disbelief. The words caught in their throat, a hot wave of fury mixed with utter shock washing over them. Perfect? Perfect for an uninvited, unannounced party on their private property? The sheer, unadulterated nerve. This wasn't just an invasion, it was an act of war. Brenda turned to signal someone, her back briefly to Alex, directing a group of men carrying a giant grill toward Alex's prize-winning perennial garden. As she moved, Alex heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible click, followed by a low, mechanical whirring sound, easily swallowed by the party's growing noise. A small, almost imperceptible smirk tugged at the corner of Alex's lips, a cold, quiet calm settling over the storm within. "Oh, Brenda," Alex thought, their gaze locked on the unsuspecting HOA president's back. "You just triggered the first one. Now watch the trap spring into action." The story of how Alex, a person who truly believed in the power of a kind word and a helping hand, ended up secretly rigging their property with harmless but highly effective deterrents began subtly, like a tiny crack in a perfect wall. Just a year prior, Alex had moved to Maple Creek, a picture-perfect suburban haven with manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, and a sense of quiet community that promised peace. Alex had envisioned lazy afternoons gardening, friendly waves with neighbors, and a general feeling of belonging. The first few weeks were everything Alex had hoped for. Neighbors, like old Mrs. Henderson with her gentle smile and Mr. Davies, always tinkering with his antique car, offered warm welcomes. There were potlucks and impromptu sidewalk chats, and Alex felt a genuine warmth towards this new chapter of their life. Alex, being someone who loved to share and connect, made an effort to bake cookies for new neighbors and offer assistance wherever it was needed. They helped Mrs. Henderson carry in her groceries when she looked tired and even spent a Saturday morning assisting Mr. Davies with a stubborn engine part, learning a thing or two about classic cars in the process. Alex believed that a strong community was built on small acts of kindness, on empathy and understanding, and they truly wanted to be a positive force in Maple Creek. Then came Brenda. Brenda Sterling wasn't just a neighbor, she was the reigning queen of Maple Creek, specifically as the elected president of the Homeowners Association. Their initial meeting was deceptively cordial. Brenda, with her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and impeccably pressed outfits, glided over to Alex's doorstep carrying a welcome basket filled with local brochures and a condescending smile. "Welcome to Maple Creek, dear," she had said, her voice dripping with an artificial sweetness that set Alex's teeth on edge even then. "I'm Brenda Sterling, your HOA president. Just so you know, we like to keep things uniform here. It maintains property values, you see." Her eyes, sharp and assessing, swept over Alex's relatively modest but charming home, pausing pointedly at a vibrant, albeit small, patch of newly planted wildflowers near the mailbox. "Those are interesting," she commented, not really asking. "Do make sure they stay within the approved height regulations. We have a very strict landscaping policy." Alex, always one to give the benefit of the doubt, had simply smiled. "They're native wildflowers, Brenda. They're wonderful for the local ecosystem and attract butterflies. I've made sure they're not invasive." Alex even offered to bring Brenda a copy of the plant list and explain their benefits. Brenda, however, had simply waved a dismissive hand. "Natives are all well and good, dear, but consistency is key. Just keep an eye on them." That was the first tiny crack. It escalated quickly. Alex, a passionate gardener, had spent weeks creating a small, tasteful bird feeder out of reclaimed wood and hung it from a sturdy branch in their backyard. It was a peaceful addition, attracting colorful songbirds that filled the mornings with their cheerful chirping. 2 days later, a formal notice arrived in Alex's mailbox, embossed with the HOA logo. It cited a clause about wildlife attraction that could lead to potential nuisance or mess. Alex was bewildered. A bird feeder? A nuisance? They tried to explain, to reason, to offer to place a tray beneath it to catch any stray seeds. Brenda's response was a curt email: "Rules are rules, Alex. It's for the good of the community." The feeder had to go. Alex, frustrated but still clinging to their belief in peaceful resolution, reluctantly complied. The incidents continued, each one chipping away at Alex's patience and sense of autonomy. Alex decided to paint their front door a soothing, muted seafoam green, a shade they had fallen in love with, thinking it would add a personal touch to their home while still being understated. A week later, another formal notice arrived, stating the exact hue of green was not on the approved neutral palette list and must be repainted within 30 days, or fines would accrue. Alex, remembering Brenda's earlier comments about consistency, felt a chill creep up their spine. They tried to appeal to the HOA board, attending a meeting, armed with swatches and a polite argument about personal expression within reasonable bounds. The other board members, a nervous group who seemed to cower under Brenda's icy gaze, simply nodded along as Brenda confidently declared, "We cannot have anarchy, Alex. One person deviates, and soon the entire neighborhood will look like a patchwork quilt. This is about maintaining standards." Alex saw then that Brenda didn't just want conformity, she wanted absolute control. Despite these growing frustrations, Alex tried to extend kindness. When Brenda's luxury car broke down in her driveway for a few days, Alex, remembering how helpful Mr. Davies had been with his car, offered to pick up groceries for her. Brenda accepted with a tight-lipped smile, rattling off a long, specific list, but offered no thanks. Another time, Alex noticed Brenda struggling with some heavy bags of garden soil. Alex, without hesitation, dropped what they were doing and helped her carry them to her backyard. Brenda merely huffed, finally. Some neighborly spirit. She twisted every kind gesture into a confirmation of her own superiority, as if Alex was simply fulfilling a duty to her. Alex even tried to mediate disputes between other neighbors and Brenda. Old Mr. Finch, a quiet widower who liked to put out a small, festive flag for every holiday, found himself constantly targeted by Brenda for unapproved decorations. Alex spoke to Mr. Finch, then tried to gently explain to Brenda that these were small, temporary expressions of joy, not violations. Brenda simply glared. Some people just don't understand the importance of upholding community aesthetics, Alex, she had lectured, as if Alex were a child. Alex realized then that their attempts at empathy and bridge building were seen by Brenda not as strengths, but as weaknesses to exploit. The constant barrage of petty rules, the unsolicited advice disguised as commands, and Brenda's sheer disregard for individual autonomy began to wear Alex down. They felt their peaceful home becoming a battleground, their freedom slowly eroded by a woman who reveled in micromanagement. Alex spent countless nights staring at their now bird-feeder-less, wildflower-free yard, feeling a profound sense of injustice. They had come here for peace, for community, but all they found was a petty tyrant. It was during one particularly frustrating evening, after receiving a cease and desist letter about the shade of their garden shed, which Brenda had apparently measured with a paint swatch tool, that an idea, mischievous and determined, began to form in Alex's mind. If direct confrontation, polite appeals, and acts of kindness only fueled Brenda's fire, then a different approach was needed. Something non-harmful, something surprising, something that would send an unmistakable message: my property is mine. Alex was a bit of a tinkerer, someone who enjoyed building and solving practical problems. They had an unused shed full of old sensors, wires, and various odds and ends. The traps wouldn't cause any injury, no damage, no lasting mess. They would simply be unforgettable. A last resort, a line drawn in the sand, built out of desperation but also a quiet sense of artistic protest. Over the next few weeks, under the cover of night, Alex began to carefully install their ingenious, harmless deterrents, camouflaging them perfectly among the landscaping, ensuring every wire and sensor was precisely within their property lines. Brenda's audacity, far from diminishing, seemed to swell with each perceived victory. She began subtly pushing the boundaries, testing Alex's resolve. She started using Alex's side yard, a narrow strip of grass between Alex's house and the fence, as a shortcut for her pampered poodle, Mr. Snuggles, despite clear signs about keeping pets off private property. She would wave cheerily if Alex was outside, as if this was a perfectly normal thing to do. She'd leave flyers for HOA events, not just on the mailbox, but tucked under Alex's doormat, sometimes demanding attendance at compulsory, community betterment meetings with veiled threats of fines for non-participation. At the actual meetings, Brenda would often make passive-aggressive comments. Some residents, she would say, casting a pointed glance at Alex, lack the necessary community spirit. Perhaps they prefer to keep to themselves, even when it affects the collective good. Each incident was a tiny cut, deepening Alex's resolve. Then came the announcement for the annual HOA Summer Gala. Traditionally, it was a modest affair held at the community clubhouse, a slightly dingy building with fluorescent lights and uncomfortable plastic chairs. Most residents tolerated it as a necessary evil. But this year, Brenda, with a flourish, announced a change of venue. For a more intimate, bespoke experience, she declared at a tense HOA meeting, we have secured a private residence for this year's festivities. No resident had been consulted. It was a unilateral declaration, Brenda's latest power play. Rumors swirled like autumn leaves about whose house it would be. Mrs. Albright's, maybe? No, she barely has a patio. Perhaps the Millers? They have a big yard. Alex dismissed it, thinking, no one in their right mind would volunteer their home for Brenda's gala. Not that crazy. Alex was wrong. A mere 3 days before the scheduled gala, a thick, official-looking envelope, adorned with the imposing HOA crest, appeared in Alex's mailbox. Alex opened it with a sense of dread. Inside was a formal notice, not a request, but a decree, notice of selection for annual HOA Summer Gala venue. Pursuant to Article 7, Section 3B of the Maple Creek Homeowners Association bylaws, your property at 1422 Sycamore Lane has been selected as the prime location for the annual Summer Gala. Preparations will commence at 8 a.m. on gala date. We appreciate your cooperation in upholding community excellence. Alex's blood ran cold. Selected? There was no discussion, no request for permission, no consideration of their privacy. It was a declaration of invasion. They immediately tried to contact Brenda. Calls went straight to voicemail. Emails were ignored. Alex even drove to Brenda's house, knocking firmly, but Brenda's shades were drawn, her car conspicuously absent from the driveway, clearly avoiding any confrontation. Alex contacted other HOA board members, but they stammered, offering weak excuses. Brenda said it was handled, or it's for the good of the community, Alex. Just for one evening. They were either too intimidated by Brenda or complicit in her outrageous scheme. Alex felt trapped, violated, and utterly powerless. This was the ultimate invasion of privacy and property rights, a brazen act of territorial conquest. The previous minor infringements now seemed like quaint annoyances compared to this full-blown assault. Their home, their sanctuary, was about to be forcibly transformed into Brenda's party playground. The anger that had simmered for so long began to boil, but it was a cold, determined anger, not a wild, uncontrolled one. It was the anger that fuels quiet preparation. Alex spent the remaining days before the gala meticulously checking every sensor, every wire, every hidden device. They reinforced the existing traps and even added a few more, strategically placed in areas Brenda and her partygoers would likely trespass first. Alex wanted to send a clear, unforgettable message without resorting to actual harm. This was Alex's final stand, their silent protest against a tyrant. The morning of the gala arrived under a deceptively peaceful clear blue sky. Alex was on high alert, watching from behind their closed blinds. First, large delivery trucks rumbled down the street, parking near the curb. Then came the party planners, a group of efficient, business-like individuals setting up tents and decorative arches, all still on the public sidewalk or Brenda's own property. Alex held their breath, a knot of dread tightening in their stomach. They watched Brenda arrive, resplendent in her floral dress, directing the operation with the precision of a military general. And then it happened. With a triumphant smirk on her face, Brenda waved her hand towards Alex's lawn. A team of caterers, pushing heavy carts laden with food and serving equipment, began to roll them directly onto Alex's perfectly manicured lawn, crossing the invisible boundary Alex had carefully marked just yesterday. Next came the bouncy castle team, dragging the deflated monstrosity over the delicate grass. The rhythmic thud of stakes being hammered into the ground, the loud chatter of the party planners, the arrogant directions shouted by Brenda, it was all a symphony of violation. Each sound was a drumbeat, confirming the invasion. Alex stood there, hidden from view, watching their private world being trampled. The rage was a cold, hard lump in their gut, but beneath it was a quiet, almost serene determination. They remembered all the times they had tried kindness, all the moments they had been dismissed, invalidated, and walked over. This was the moment their patience didn't just run out, it dissolved into something entirely new, a calm, calculating resolve. The setup continued for what felt like an eternity. The music started, soft at first, then growing louder, and finally, the first trickle of guests began to arrive. This brought Alex to that exact moment, standing on their back porch, sunlight too bright, sound too loud, watching Brenda Sterling signal for the grill to be moved directly into their precious perennial garden. The faint click, the low whir. The first trap had been sprung. Brenda, completely unaware of the ticking time bomb her triumphant grin now represented, continued to direct her unwitting accomplices. She pointed to a patch of vibrant petunias, indicating where the heavy charcoal grill should go. "Right there, boys. And make sure it's perfectly level," she commanded, her voice ringing with authority. The two young men from the catering company, looking slightly bewildered but eager to please, began to maneuver the cumbersome grill. Their boots crunched over the pristine gravel path Alex had carefully laid, a path that led directly to a seemingly innocent bird bath. As they pushed the grill, one of the caterers, a lanky young man named Kevin, nudged the base of the bird bath with his foot. A soft click echoed, easily drowned out by the party music. Suddenly, with a hiss and a whoosh, a powerful jet of water erupted from the bird bath's basin, arcing high into the air. It wasn't just a gentle spray. This was a theatrical deluge, designed for maximum surprise. The water, infused with a harmless, brightly colored, non-staining food dye that Alex had preloaded, created a vivid rainbow arc over Kevin and his startled colleague. "Whoa!" Kevin yelped, stumbling backward, soaked from head to toe in a spectrum of colors. His colleague dropped his end of the grill with a loud clang, narrowly missing his foot, and stared wide-eyed at the unexpected fountain. The guests nearest to them shrieked with laughter, thinking it was some kind of planned water feature, a novel entertainment for the gala. Brenda spun around, her face a mask of annoyance. "Kevin! What in the blazes are you doing? You're making a spectacle," she snapped, completely missing the true source of the sudden downpour. Kevin, dripping like a rainbow-colored dog, stammered, I just touched it, ma'am. It just exploded." Alex, still standing silently on the back porch, watched the scene unfold with a quiet satisfaction. This was exactly what they had hoped for: surprise, confusion, and absolutely no harm. The water, they knew, would evaporate quickly, leaving no trace of its vibrant hue. It was a theatrical warning shot, a prelude to the main event. Brenda, ever the control freak, quickly took charge of the sputtering caterers. "Just get the grill in place. And for heaven's sake, be more careful," she ordered, pushing them towards the designated spot. As they awkwardly repositioned the grill, a second, more elaborate trap was triggered. A faint laser beam, barely visible in the bright afternoon light, was tripped by the movement of the grill over a specific patch of grass. Suddenly, from hidden speakers nestled in the flower beds around the perimeter of the lawn, a series of increasingly bizarre and unsettling sounds erupted. First, a loud, realistic growl that sounded like a very large, very angry dog. Then, the piercing screech of a hawk, followed by the spine-tingling hiss of a snake. The sound effects were perfectly looped, creating an unnerving cacophony that made the party guests pause, looking around nervously. A woman with a pearl necklace, sipping her champagne, nervously clutched her husband's arm. "Did you hear that, Gerald? It sounds like a jungle in here." Gerald, a portly man in a too-tight suit, squinted at the bushes. "Probably just some local wildlife, dear. Brenda always did say Alex's yard was wild." He chuckled, a little too loudly. Brenda, meanwhile, stomped over to a group of guests who had already started helping themselves to the appetizers. "What's with the ruckus?" she demanded, gesturing vaguely at the bushes. "Is someone playing a prank? This is a classy event, not a zoo." She tried to laugh it off, but her eyes darted nervously. The caterers, still damp from their colorful shower, exchanged bewildered glances. Alex's hidden speakers, however, continued their symphony of the wild, subtly undermining the festive atmosphere. It was disorienting, designed to make people feel just a little bit off, a little bit uneasy. The atmosphere, which had been buzzing with excited chatter, began to shift. Conversations became hushed. Guests, initially amused by the colorful water, now looked around with a growing sense of unease at the strange animal noises. Brenda, sensing the shift, tried to rally the crowd. "All right, everyone. Let's get this party started. Food is almost ready." She clapped her hands together, a forced cheeriness in her voice. As more guests arrived, guided by Brenda's imperious directions, they ventured further into Alex's meticulously planned maze of surprises. A group of teenagers, giggling, decided to explore the pathway leading to a secluded gazebo, a cozy spot Alex had often used for reading. As the first teenager stepped onto the slate path, a series of motion sensors hidden beneath the flagstones sprang to life. Suddenly, from strategically placed mini projectors disguised as garden lights, beams of light crisscrossed the path, projecting swirling psychedelic patterns onto the trees and bushes around them. Then, loud, cartoonish boing and sproing sounds, like something out of an old Looney Tunes episode, echoed through the air, perfectly synchronized with the flashing lights. The teenagers shrieked with a mix of surprise and delight. "Whoa! This is sick," one yelled, trying to dance in the swirling lights. But the adults, more accustomed to polite garden parties, reacted differently. A middle-aged couple, already unnerved by the animal sounds, stumbled back from the path as the lights flashed erratically around them. "What in the world is going on?" the woman whispered, pulling her husband away. "It's like a haunted house." Brenda's face began to flush a deep crimson. This was not the elegant, controlled gala she had envisioned. Her perfectly orchestrated event was dissolving into a chaotic, surreal performance. She stormed towards the gazebo, yelling, "Turn that nonsense off. Who is responsible for this?" But there was no off switch visible, and the sounds and lights continued their bewildering display, turning the serene gazebo into a low-budget disco. Alex, still hidden, allowed a small smile to touch their lips. The joy of creating something harmless yet undeniably effective was a profound one. Each surprise was meticulously planned, each sound, each light, designed to confuse and disorient without causing any real distress. They weren't meant to hurt, only to deter, to make Brenda and her party realize, in a very inconvenient way, that this was not a place for them. The party guests, initially charmed by the novelty of a backyard gala, were now becoming increasingly uncomfortable. The animal sounds persisted, the colorful water still slowly drying on the caterers, and now the disco lights in the gazebo added to the general sense of absurdity. Children, initially excited by the bouncy castle, which was still deflated, now looked a little scared by the strange noises. Parents began gathering their kids, their polite smiles turning into wary frowns. Brenda, realizing her meticulously planned facade was crumbling, tried to exert control. She grabbed a microphone from the DJ, who looked as confused as everyone else. "Attention, everyone," she bellowed, her voice echoing strangely through the sound system, which seemed to be picking up the phantom animal noises. "There seems to be some technical difficulties. Please ignore the unusual sounds. This is still going to be a wonderful gala." Just as she finished, and as if on cue, a powerful, oscillating fan, disguised as a garden ornament, whirred to life near the appetizer table. It wasn't just any fan, it was one Alex had adapted to blow powerful gusts of air. With a mighty gust, it sent napkins, paper plates, and even some of the lighter appetizers fluttering into the air. A plate of mini quiches sailed through the air and landed with a splat on Gerald's pristine white shirt. "My quiches," he cried, looking down at the gooey mess. "And my dress," shrieked a woman as a paper napkin slapped onto her face. Panic, light and chaotic, began to spread. Guests dodged flying paper products, trying to save their drinks and food. Brenda screamed, "Turn that fan off." She rushed towards it, her movements stiff with fury. As her foot landed firmly on a hidden pressure plate near the fan's base, an even more dramatic trap was sprung. From a concealed nozzle in the nearby bushes, a thick, white, foamy substance began to erupt, completely engulfing the fan and, within seconds, coating Brenda Sterling from head to toe. It was a harmless, biodegradable, non-toxic foam, like something from a massive bubble bath, but it covered Brenda completely, making her look like a giant, angry marshmallow. The foam continued to expand, bubbling up around her ankles, then her knees, creating a bizarre, frothy landscape around the appetizer table. Guests gasped, then a few snickered. Brenda shrieked, a sound muffled by the foam, as she struggled to push it away from her face, her carefully coiffed hair now plastered with white goo. This was not just a deterrent, it was a humiliating, unforgettable spectacle, and Alex watched it all with a quiet, satisfied nod. The grand gala was quickly descending into utter pandemonium, exactly as Alex had planned. Brenda Sterling, now a frothy, angry monument of white foam, let out a gurgled cry of pure outrage. The foam, surprisingly persistent, clung to her floral dress and plastered her hair to her head, making her perfectly coiffed blonde hair look like a melted meringue. She flailed her arms, trying to bat away the rising tide of bubbles, but each frantic movement only seemed to coat her further. Guests gasped, then a ripple of suppressed laughter spread through the crowd. Some children, however, found it utterly hilarious. A little girl in a pink dress pointed and shrieked with glee, "Mommy, look! It's a bubble monster!" Her mother, trying to stifle her own giggles, quickly pulled her away. Brenda, blinded by the foam and sputtering in indignation, stumbled backward, her designer heels sinking slightly into Alex's perfectly manicured lawn. She bumped directly into a carefully concealed, low-lying sprinkler head. This sprinkler, however, wasn't for watering plants. It was designed for a very specific, very surprising effect. With another sudden hiss, a powerful burst of confetti exploded upwards, showering Brenda and everyone within a 10-foot radius in a glittering cascade of tiny, colorful paper stars and streamers. It wasn't just ordinary confetti. Alex had chosen a special kind that shimmered brilliantly in the afternoon sun, designed to cling stubbornly to anything it touched. Now, Brenda wasn't just a foam monster. She was a sparkly foam monster, a truly magnificent and humiliating sight. The combination of the sticky foam and the clinging confetti created a spectacle that silenced even the most polite guests. Some snapped photos on their phones, unable to resist documenting the absurdity. Brenda roared, a sound more of frustration than pain, as she blindly swiped at the glittering paper stuck to her face. "This is outrageous. Unacceptable. Who is doing this?" she screamed, her voice muffled but still commanding. The bizarre animal sounds from the hidden speakers continued, now joined by the distant, frantic whirring of the fan, which was still attempting to blow foam around. The psychedelic lights from the gazebo continued to flash. The party guests, initially just uneasy, were now actively distressed. The festive atmosphere had completely vanished, replaced by a surreal sense of chaotic performance art. Conversations had ceased. People were whispering, pointing, and slowly, subtly, backing away towards the street. Alex, watching from the kitchen window now, felt a strange mix of vindication and a touch of something else, almost pity. Brenda, for all her tyrannical ways, looked utterly ridiculous, stripped of her composure and authority. But this was the consequence of her actions, the price of invading someone's peace. Alex had tried kindness, empathy, and reason. Brenda had chosen arrogance and invasion. One of the caterers, Kevin, who was still slightly damp and rainbow-colored from the earlier water jet, nervously approached the foam-covered Brenda. "Miss Sterling, are you all right?" he stammered, trying to offer a napkin, which immediately stuck to her foamy hand. Brenda shrieked, batting his hand away. "Of course, I'm not all right, you imbecile. I'm covered in this. And glitter. Get these people out of Alex's yard. This is a disaster." Her command, however, lacked its usual imperious sting, muffled by the foam. Just as Brenda was struggling, trying to wipe the foam and confetti from her eyes, a particularly well-dressed couple, Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, who were prominent figures in the community and usually Brenda's staunchest allies, decided they had had enough. Mrs. Harrison, her pearls clutched tightly, turned to her husband. "Richard, this is simply too much. I won't have my reputation soiled by this circus. It's barbaric." Mr. Harrison, looking equally appalled, nodded grimly. "Quite right, dear. This is hardly the gala we were promised. Let's make our apologies and leave." They were the first to make a clear break for the gate, their hasty departure sparking a chain reaction. Other guests, seeing Brenda's humiliating predicament and sensing the escalating chaos, began to follow suit. The loud music still throbbed, but now it felt out of place, accompanying a mass exodus rather than a joyous party. The caterers, looking increasingly bewildered, stopped trying to serve food and simply stood by their tables, watching the unraveling event. The bouncy castle lay deflated, an ironically sad symbol of the failed celebration. Brenda, slowly starting to make out the departing figures through her foamy veil, realized what was happening. Her gala, her carefully planned display of power and community leadership, was disintegrating into a humiliating rout. "Wait! Where are you all going?" she shrieked, but her words were swallowed by the rising tide of departure. Alex watched as the carefully chosen traps continued to perform their task. As guests hurried towards the front gate, many of them inadvertently triggered other surprises. A group of women in elegant sundresses stepped onto a section of pathway near the rose garden. Suddenly, a series of hidden air jets along the path blasted upward, not with water, but with a fine mist that smelled faintly of rotten eggs. It was entirely harmless, dissipating quickly, but utterly revolting. The women gagged, clutching their noses, and practically ran the rest of the way. "Oh, good heavens! What is that ghastly smell?" one exclaimed, fanning herself frantically. Another group, taking a shortcut across the lawn to avoid the lingering foam and confetti, stumbled into a section where motion-activated sprinklers, set at a very low height, suddenly unleashed a harmless, but intensely sticky, slime. It wasn't enough to trip them, but it coated their shoes and ankles in a bright, green, gooey substance. They shrieked in disgust, trying to wipe it off on the grass, only to spread it further. The slime, Alex knew, would wash off easily with water, but the immediate reaction was one of pure revulsion. The scene in Alex's backyard rapidly devolved into a comedic nightmare for Brenda and a baffling, unpleasant experience for her guests. The air was a cacophony of strange animal noises, cartoonish boings, confused murmurs, and increasingly frantic demands from the foam-covered Brenda. The ground was littered with colorful confetti, sticky slime, and the faint, unpleasant odor of rotten eggs. The caterers, no longer pretending to work, simply packed up their most valuable equipment, eyeing the exits nervously. Brenda, finally managing to wipe some foam from her eyes, saw the extent of the chaos. Her guests were fleeing, her caterers were packing, and her pristine reputation was rapidly dissolving into a sticky, smelly, glittery mess. She looked around, her eyes wild with fury, trying to pinpoint the source of this systematic sabotage. Her gaze finally landed on Alex's back door, where a shadow had briefly moved. A terrible, dawning realization began to spread across her face. Just then, as if to cap off the theatrical disarray, a final, grand trap was activated. A tiny, almost invisible wire, stretched low across the main pathway leading to the bouncy castle, was snagged by a particularly tall guest hurrying to escape. This triggered a mechanism in the now deflated bouncy castle. With a sudden whoosh, a massive, hidden air pump beneath it roared to life. The enormous bouncy castle, which had been lying flat like a sad, deflated beast, began to inflate rapidly, ballooning upwards with incredible speed. It lifted with such force that it briefly nudged one of the catering tables, sending a tiered dessert stand toppling with a crash. Cakes and pastries tumbled to the grass, now covered in foam, confetti, and green slime. The bouncy castle continued to expand, reaching its full, towering height in mere seconds, casting a gigantic, garish shadow over the retreating guests. It was a giant, inflatable monument to the party's utter ruination, effectively blocking the escape route for anyone still attempting to flee through the back. Brenda, completely surrounded by expanding foam and glittering confetti, stared at the monstrous, suddenly inflated bouncy castle, then at the fleeing guests, and finally, her eyes narrowed with a chilling fury. She finally understood. This was no accident. This was deliberate. Her gaze, now cold and sharp, fixed on Alex's house. A new, terrifying resolve hardened her features, promising a retribution far more personal than any HOA fine. The sight of the monstrous, fully inflated bouncy castle, now towering over Alex's backyard and blocking the main pathway, ignited a new kind of fury in Brenda Sterling. She stood there, a vision of sparkly, foamy indignation, her eyes wide with a terrifying realization. This wasn't some series of unfortunate coincidences or catering mishaps. This was deliberate. This was a direct assault. And her gaze, now piercing through the remaining film of bubbles, landed squarely on Alex's house, a silent, chilling promise of war. The last remaining guests, trapped by the bouncy castle's sudden inflation, scrambled to find alternative exits. Some cautiously picked their way around the edges of the enormous inflatable, stepping through lingering patches of sticky slime and avoiding the phantom smells. Others simply cut across the now ruined flower beds, desperate to escape the surreal chaos. The caterers, having given up entirely on salvaging the food, were making a hasty retreat, dragging their equipment towards the front of the house and leaving a trail of discarded platters and napkins in their wake. Brenda, fueled by a potent mix of humiliation and rage, began to stalk towards Alex's back porch, her foamy, confetti-laden dress squelching with every angry step. She left a trail of white bubbles and glittering paper stars in her wake. "Alex! You come out here this instant!" she shrieked, her voice hoarse, but now carrying a dangerous edge. "I know this was you. You're going to pay for this. Every single one of these outrages." Alex, still observing from the discreet vantage point of their kitchen window, felt a shiver, not of fear, but of grim anticipation. The confrontation was inevitable. They had prepared for this, not with weapons, but with resolve. Stepping out onto the porch, Alex faced Brenda, their expression calm, almost serene, a stark contrast to Brenda's frothing fury. "Hello, Brenda," Alex said, their voice even and quiet, cutting through the lingering sounds of the bizarre animal noises still emanating from the hidden speakers. The contrast between Alex's composure and Brenda's disheveled, glitter-bomb state was striking. Brenda stopped dead in her tracks, just a few feet from the porch steps, glowering. "Don't you, hello, Brenda, me, you saboteur." She gestured wildly at the ruined backyard, spraying foam and confetti. "Look at this. My gala. My reputation. You've ruined everything. What in the blazes did you do?" Alex took a deep breath. "I simply protected my property, Brenda. As I asked you to do repeatedly, and as you refused." Alex gestured around the chaotic scene. "This is not a community event, Brenda. This is an invasion. You brought a private party, uninvited and against my express wishes, onto my private property. I had to ensure my boundaries were respected." Brenda scoffed, a frothy snort. "Boundaries? Don't be ridiculous. As HOA president, I have the right to select suitable venues for community events. And your yard is clearly the most suitable. This is for the good of the community." "No, Brenda," Alex countered, their voice firm. "The HOA bylaws state that community events are typically held in designated common areas or require the express written consent of a homeowner for a private residence. You never asked for my consent. You issued a directive, a demand, as if you owned my home. That is not how a community functions. That is not how empathy works. That is simply bullying." Alex's word struck a nerve. Brenda's face twisted further. "Bullying? I am maintaining order. I am upholding standards. And you," she sputtered, pointing a foamy finger, "you are an anarchist. A deviant. What were those ridiculous contraptions? The foam. The lights. The smells. You could have hurt someone. They were all completely harmless, Brenda," Alex stated, unblinking. "Non-toxic, non-damaging, and designed only to deter, not to injure. I went to great lengths to ensure no one would be hurt, only inconvenienced and surprised. Unlike your unilateral decision to invade my home, which showed a complete disregard for my rights and my peace. Alex paused, then added, I tried to speak to you. I tried to reason. I tried to offer help in the past. But you repeatedly chose to ignore me, to dismiss my concerns, and to exert your will without consideration for anyone else. This, Alex gestured at the chaos around them, is the direct result of your choices, Brenda. Not mine. Brenda seemed to deflate slightly, the foam on her dress shimmering mockingly in the sun. The sheer number of witnesses, the fleeing guests, the physical evidence of the disaster, all seemed to weigh down her usual bluster. She looked around at the ruined party, the deflated bouncy castle looming large, the departing cars of her former guests. The animal sounds faded into the background as if even the hidden speakers had tired of the show. Just then, Mr. Davies, Alex's kind, elderly neighbor who was always tinkering with cars, slowly approached the edge of Alex's yard. He had witnessed the entire spectacle, having decided to stay and see how things unfolded. He cleared his throat. Brenda, he said, his voice surprisingly firm for his age, Alex is right. You didn't ask. You just told. That ain't how a community works. Not a good one, anyway. Other neighbors, peeking from behind their curtains or standing at the edge of their own yards, seemed to nod in silent agreement. Brenda's eyes darted nervously between Alex and Mr. Davies, then swept across the other houses where faces now openly watched. Her usual power came from the illusion of universal support, from the quiet compliance of others. Now, that illusion was shattered. She was isolated, exposed, and covered in foam. This is an outrage. Brenda stammered again, her voice losing some of its earlier steel. You will be fined. You will be expelled from the HOA. I will ensure you regret this, Alex. Alex remained calm. You can try, Brenda. But I have documented every attempt to communicate with you, every notice you sent, and every one of your dismissals. I also have plenty of witnesses to your invasion of my property. I believe the rules apply to the HOA president, too, especially when it comes to respecting private property. A tense silence hung in the air, broken only by the distant sounds of departing cars and a lone, persistent squelch from Brenda's foam-covered shoe. Brenda, for the first time, seemed truly at a loss. Her face, still partially obscured by foam, showed a flicker of something close to fear. Her carefully constructed world of control was crumbling, not with a bang, but with a series of harmless, humiliating booby traps. Suddenly, a loud, insistent honking started from the street. It was Brenda's husband, a meek man named Gerald who usually stayed far away from HOA drama. He was in their luxury SUV, leaning on the horn, his face pale with embarrassment as he frantically waved for Brenda to get in. He had clearly seen enough. Brenda's eyes darted from Alex to Gerald, then back to the ruined party. Her shoulders slumped slightly. The fight had gone out of her, at least for this moment. With a final, venomous glare at Alex, she turned and, still squelching, hurried towards her waiting husband, leaving a trail of foam and confetti on Alex's driveway. She didn't look back as Gerald sped away, leaving Alex's once peaceful, now chaotic, backyard in silence, save for the hum of the still inflated bouncy castle. Alex stood on the porch for a long moment, surveying the aftermath. The vibrant foam, the scattered confetti, the lingering smell of rotten eggs, the slime-covered grass, the giant bouncy castle looming like a garish monument to absurdity. It was a mess, yes, but it was their mess. A mess they had created in self-defense, a declaration of their boundaries. The quiet hum of the bouncy castle was almost triumphant. Alex knew this wasn't over. Brenda Sterling would not let this go. But for now, Alex had reclaimed their peace, one harmless trap at a time. The battle had been won, but the war, Alex sensed, was just beginning. The silence that fell over Alex's backyard after Brenda's hasty retreat was thick and heavy, punctuated only by the low, persistent hum of the still inflated bouncy castle. The air, while no longer filled with the party's cacophony, carried lingering hints of rotten eggs and the sweet, cloying scent of the biodegradable foam. Confetti glittered on the grass like forgotten jewels, and the streaks of green slime created bizarre, abstract art on the pathways. It was a battlefield, but a strangely triumphant one. Alex walked slowly through the yard, surveying the aftermath. The sight of the deflated bouncy castle from earlier, now an imposing, cheerful barrier, brought a wry smile to their face. The pride they felt wasn't malicious, but a deep satisfaction in having stood their ground, in protecting their sanctuary through ingenuity rather than aggression. They started to gently prod the foam with their foot. It was indeed harmless, already beginning to dissolve. The confetti, while annoying to clean, was just paper. Every trap had performed exactly as intended, a loud, clear message, harmlessly delivered. As Alex reached the edge of the lawn, old Mrs. Henderson, her kind face etched with concern, cautiously approached the property line from her own yard. "Alex, dear," she called out softly, her voice filled with a mix of apprehension and sympathy. "Are you all right?" That was quite a spectacle. Alex offered a small, genuine smile. "I'm fine, Mrs. Henderson. Just a bit of a cleanup ahead." Mrs. Henderson wrung her hands. "I saw what Brenda did. Just stomping in here like she owned the place. It wasn't right, Alex. None of us dared to say anything, but we all felt it. It was simply not right." Her words were a balm, a quiet confirmation that Alex wasn't alone in their frustration with Brenda. It was an important reminder that empathy and understanding still existed in the neighborhood, even if they were often overshadowed by Brenda's heavy-handed tactics. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson," Alex replied, genuinely grateful for her quiet support. "It means a lot to hear that." "Well, you just let me know if you need any help with this mess," she offered, gesturing vaguely at the foamy, glittery scene. "Though I'm not sure where one would even begin." She managed a small, hesitant chuckle. Just then, Mr. Davies, who had gone back to his garage after Brenda left, reappeared, rolling a large, industrial-looking fan on wheels. "Alex," he boomed, a twinkle in his eye. "Heard you might need a hand airing out this foam. Got this baby just for such emergencies." He winked, clearly enjoying the poetic justice of the situation. "And maybe a hose for that artwork on your path." Alex felt a warmth spread through them. This was the true spirit of community, not Brenda's oppressive control. These were neighbors who, despite their earlier fear of Brenda, were now stepping forward, showing their quiet support. "Mr. Davies, Mrs. Henderson, you're both too kind," Alex said, genuinely touched. "I can manage, but the offer means a lot." Mr. Davies waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense, lad. What are neighbors for? Brenda's gone and made a mess, but we'll sort it out. She won't win by making you miserable." He set up the fan, and its powerful hum began to gently disperse the remaining foam, sending it swirling into harmless, diminishing drifts. As the afternoon wore on, a few other neighbors, emboldened by Mrs. Henderson and Mr. Davies, cautiously came over. A young couple, Sarah and Tom, who had recently moved in, timidly approached with a bucket and sponges. "We saw everything, Alex," Sarah confessed, blushing. "Brenda's been really difficult for us too. We just wanted to offer some help. We have some biodegradable cleaner for that green stuff." Alex was genuinely moved. "You really don't have to," they insisted, but their voice conveyed their appreciation. "We want to," Tom said firmly. "It's not right what she did. And you handled it brilliantly. Without hurting anyone." The afternoon turned into an impromptu community cleanup. What could have been a lonely, frustrating chore became a shared act of quiet rebellion and solidarity. The bizarre animal noises eventually faded completely, the bouncy castle was slowly deflated by Mr. Davies's expert hands, and the glittering confetti was swept into piles by giggling children who had decided the aftermath was more fun than the party itself. As they worked, stories were quietly exchanged about Brenda's various tyrannical acts: a fine for leaving a garden hose visible, a demand to remove a child's swing set, a threat over the color of someone's recycling bin. A sense of shared grievance, and now, shared quiet triumph, bonded them. By early evening, most of the immediate mess was gone. The grass was still slightly damp, the air a little sweet from the remnants of the foam, but the garden was recognizable again. Alex felt a profound sense of relief, but also a growing sense of foreboding. Brenda Sterling, a woman who thrived on control and public image, would not simply let this go. This was a personal affront, a challenge to her very authority, and she would undoubtedly retaliate. Alex knew this peace was temporary. The next morning brought a tangible shift in the neighborhood. While Brenda was nowhere to be seen, her absence was more noticeable than her presence. Whispers traveled quickly. People avoided eye contact with her house. The usual morning joggers seemed to take a wider berth around her property. There was a quiet hum of defiance, a newfound courage in the air. Alex, however, didn't relax. They spent the morning meticulously cleaning the last traces of the party, removing the final bits of confetti, and checking their traps to ensure they were all safely reset or deactivated. They expected the backlash to be swift and severe. And it was. Just as Alex finished their cleanup, a brand new, official-looking document appeared in their mailbox. It wasn't a standard HOA notice. It was a formal legal summons. Alex's hands trembled slightly as they opened it. The document stated that the Maple Creek Homeowners Association, represented by President Brenda Sterling, was suing Alex for gross negligence, property damage, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and disruption of a community event. The demanded sum was astronomical, far beyond what Alex could ever afford, enough to force them to sell their beloved home. It was Brenda's ultimate weapon, a legal hammer designed to crush Alex completely, to make an example of them, and to reassert her absolute dominance over the community. Alex stared at the chilling words, a cold dread seeping into their bones. The quiet battle of wits and harmless pranks had just escalated into a full-blown legal war. The legal summons felt like a punch to the gut, a cold, calculated strike after the surprising triumph of the day before. Alex stared at the chilling words on the document, the astronomical sum demanded, the threats of gross negligence, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Brenda wasn't just mad, she was going for total annihilation. This wasn't about the HOA anymore, it was personal, a desperate attempt to regain control and make an example out of Alex. The quiet victory of the previous day now seemed fragile, overshadowed by the daunting reality of a legal battle. Alex spent the rest of the day in a haze, the legal papers clutched in their hand. The thought of losing their home, their sanctuary, filled them with a cold dread. They reread the document, trying to make sense of the legal jargon, but it only amplified their anxiety. This was a war Alex hadn't anticipated fighting in a courtroom, a place where their harmless traps could be twisted into malicious acts. That evening, a knock came at Alex's door. It was Mr. Davies, his usually cheerful face serious, accompanied by Mrs. Henderson and Sarah and Tom, the young couple from the cleanup. They had clearly heard about the summons. News traveled fast in Maple Creek, especially news involving Brenda Sterling. "Alex, we heard," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice soft with concern. "Brenda's suing you, isn't she?" Alex nodded, holding up the dreaded document. "She is. For an outrageous amount." Mr. Davies frowned. "That woman, she just doesn't know when to quit." "But you stood up for yourself, Alex." "Someone had to." "We can't let her get away with this," Sarah added, her youthful idealism shining through. "You showed us that we don't have to just roll over and let her boss us around." Tom, ever practical, spoke next. Alex, you've been collecting evidence, right? All those notices Brenda sent you? All her ignored messages? Alex nodded. Every single one. I also have photos of the party setup, taken before everything happened. Good, Mr. Davies said with a decisive nod. Because we're not just going to sit back and watch. We're going to fight this with you. The neighbors quickly formed a plan. Mr. Davies offered to use his network to find a good lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes, someone who wasn't afraid of a bully. Mrs. Henderson, a meticulous record keeper herself, offered to help Alex organize all the documentation. Sarah and Tom proposed gathering statements from other neighbors who had suffered under Brenda's rule, to show a pattern of her abusive behavior. This was no longer just Alex's battle, it was the community's quiet revolution. Over the next few weeks, the neighborhood transformed. What Brenda intended to be a crushing defeat for Alex became a rallying cry. Neighbors, emboldened by Alex's stand and the collective support, began to speak up. Small acts of defiance popped up everywhere. A bird feeder reappeared on Mrs. Henderson's porch, Mr. Finch proudly displayed a series of colorful flags for every minor holiday, and a few houses even painted their doors slightly off the approved neutral palette. The whispers about Brenda's tyranny turned into open complaints, and more importantly, shared stories of kindness and mutual aid. The lawyer Mr. Davies found, a sharp woman named Ms. Chen, was formidable. She quickly saw through Brenda's legal bluster. Brenda Sterling's case against you is weak, Alex, Ms. Chen explained during their first meeting. She has no legal grounds to force you to host an event, and her claims of damage are absurd given the non-toxic nature of your deterrence. In fact, your counterclaim for trespass and property damage is far stronger. Ms. Chen advised Alex and the neighbors to continue gathering their evidence. As the court date approached, Brenda, still fuming, continued her campaign of intimidation. She circulated flyers with veiled threats about disruptive elements in the community and even tried to hold an emergency HOA meeting to formally vote Alex out of the association. But her power was waning. Few people showed up to her meeting, and those who did politely but firmly questioned her actions. Brenda's carefully constructed image was crumbling under the weight of her own tyranny and the unexpected unity of the community. The day of the trial finally arrived. Alex walked into the courthouse with Ms. Chen, their heart pounding, but bolstered by the silent presence of Mr. Davies, Mrs. Henderson, Sarah, and Tom, who sat in the back rows, a solid block of support. Brenda, dressed impeccably but with a visible tightness around her eyes, sat at the opposing table with her own lawyer, glaring at Alex. The initial hours of the trial were a predictable showcase of Brenda's arrogance. She testified with dramatic flair, detailing her humiliation and the destruction of her gala, painting Alex as a malicious saboteur. She presented photos of the foamy, glittery aftermath, though even her lawyer seemed to struggle to make it look truly damaging. Then came Alex's turn. Under Ms. Chen's calm questioning, Alex recounted every detail: the ignored pleas, the formal notices, the unsolicited demands, the offer of help, the gradual erosion of their peace, and Brenda's final, brazen invasion. Alex described their careful planning of harmless deterrence, emphasizing their intent was to protect, not to harm. They explained how every trap was designed to be easily cleaned and cause no lasting damage. A mess. Chen then presented Alex's meticulously kept records, emails where Brenda ignored Alex's concerns, copies of the illegal selection notice Brenda had sent, and before and after photos that clearly showed the temporary nature of the damage. Then came the turning point. Ms. Chen called Mr. Davies to the stand. He, in his quiet, unassuming way, described how Brenda had terrorized him over his holiday flags. Then came Mrs. Henderson, who tearfully recounted how Brenda had forced her to remove a small, sentimental gnome from her garden. Sarah and Tom spoke about being fined for minor, arbitrary things. Witness after witness, ordinary people from Maple Creek, stood up and painted a clear picture of Brenda Sterling, not as a community leader, but as a petty dictator. They also spoke of Alex's kindness, their attempts to foster community, and their unwavering patience. Brenda's lawyer tried to discredit them, but their stories were too consistent, too heartfelt. The judge, a stern but fair woman, listened intently. The court, initially hushed, filled with murmurs of sympathy for Alex and the other neighbors. Brenda, squirming in her seat, seemed to shrink with each testimony. Her carefully constructed facade of authority was not just crumbling, it was being systematically dismantled in front of the entire court. Finally, Ms. Chen presented her clinching piece of evidence. During the discovery process, they had uncovered a crucial clause in the original Maple Creek HOA bylaws, one Brenda had conveniently forgotten or hoped no one would notice. It stated that any unilateral decision by the HOA president to use private property for a community event without explicit, written homeowner consent was a direct violation of the HOA's own charter, and grounds for immediate removal from office and potential personal liability for any damages incurred. Brenda's lawyer spluttered, objecting wildly, but the judge ordered the bylaw entered into evidence. The truth hung in the air: Brenda had not just violated Alex's property. She had violated the very rules she was sworn to uphold. The judge called for a brief recess. When she returned, her voice was calm, but her words were devastating for Brenda. She dismissed Brenda's lawsuit against Alex, citing a complete lack of merit and an abuse of legal process. Then, she turned to the counterclaim. Based on the evidence presented, the judge declared, it is clear that Ms. Sterling, in her capacity as HOA president, acted outside the scope of her authority and in direct violation of the Maple Creek Homeowners Association bylaws. Her actions constituted trespass, caused demonstrable inconvenience, and resulted in a deliberate, uninvited invasion of Mr./Ms. Alex's private property. The judge then issued a ruling that left the courtroom in stunned silence, then erupted in a wave of murmurs. Not only was Brenda's lawsuit dismissed, but the judge ruled in favor of Alex's counterclaim. The Maple Creek Homeowners Association, under Brenda Sterling's leadership, was ordered to pay Alex a significant sum for the damages, the legal fees, and as a clear message against such egregious overreach of power. Furthermore, the judge, referencing the bylaw Ms. Chen had uncovered, also added a directive for a special, immediate HOA meeting to vote on Brenda Sterling's removal from office, citing her breach of charter. Brenda Sterling, sitting rigid at her table, her face ashen, seemed to finally break. Her meticulously controlled world had not just collapsed, it had exploded in a flurry of confetti and foamy humiliation in front of the entire community and the law. She looked at Alex, not with fury now, but with a dawning, terrible defeat. Alex walked out of the courtroom, not with a triumphant roar, but with a quiet dignity. The neighbors rushed to congratulate them, handshakes and hugs freely given. Mr. Davies clapped Alex on the shoulder, a wide grin on his face. "You did it, Alex. You stood up for all of us." Back in Maple Creek, the news spread like wildfire. The HOA meeting to vote on Brenda's removal was packed. Brenda, pale and subdued, tried to speak, but her words lacked their usual venom. The community, once cowering under her thumb, now voted unanimously. Brenda Sterling was removed from her position as HOA president, effective immediately. A new, far more empathetic, and community-focused board was elected, with Mr. Davies as its interim president. Life in Maple Creek slowly, wonderfully, changed. The air felt lighter, the smiles more genuine. Bird feeders popped up everywhere, holiday flags waved proudly, and new colors adorned front doors. Alex's home, once a target, became a symbol of quiet resilience and the power of standing up for oneself, and for others, with kindness and ingenuity. The traps remained, a secret reminder of a battle won, but now, they were simply dormant, a testament to boundaries reclaimed. Alex finally had the peace they had sought, not by hiding, but by bravely defending their small corner of the world, reminding everyone that empathy and respect, not control, were the true foundations of a happy community.